I'm Terry Lowman. I'm co-chair for the UU's for a Just Economic Community. Uh, Sally Gellert is my co-chair, and we've been doing this for several years. What, about 6, 7 years, Sally?
Think so, yep.
Yeah, nobody else wants our job. We thought it was an honor, but actually, I got nominated when I was not in the room. I didn't feel well. And I came back just to say hello because it was in the hotel. And they said, "Well, how do you feel about being co-chair?" Co-chair doesn't sound too awful. You can always push it off to somebody else. Um,
Yeah, we
we're
work
pro
pretty well as a team.
yes, we do. We're producing this for Unitarian Universalist congregations and other grassroots groups. The speakers include Reverend Bob Murphy and Lynn Dalzell, and they're in St. Petersburg, Florida. I have an opening chalice and a reading. The reading is hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something worth doing is worth doing no matter what. And that's from Valkav Havel. I don't know if you can see, but we got a flame going there.
Okay, thanks.
Um, Not happy about setting matches down. I guess I'll put it right there. Okay. Uh, Sally is going to introduce herself and tell you how she wound up doing this kind of gig. Sally?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Sally Jane Gellert. I'm in Bergen County, New Jersey. In addition to my work with Unitarian Universalists for Just Economic Community, I'm a member of Central Unitarian in Westwood, New Jersey. I I am currently wearing a Songs and Stories and Songs T-shirt from my visit with the in International Indigenous Initiative for Transformative Collaboration in summer 2019 up in South Dakota in the Grand Rapids area, um, which I attended with some other UUs, and it was really a wonderful experience to spend some time with the native Lakota people up there. Um, I worked with after Hurricane Sandy, I worked with Occupy Sandy, New Jersey, and did some relief work, and that got me in more deeply involved in some of the food justice and housing justice issues.
Okay. Uh, I'm in Ames, Iowa, home of the Meskwakis, and I'm wearing a blue sweatshirt with black jeans. Um, and Sally's going to go on and do a little introduction for Reverend Bob and Lynn.
Sure. Bob Murphy is a community minister in Florida who works for food and housing justice. Lynn Dalzell is active in community gardening and community meals programs. Bob and Lynn are married and they live together in senior citizen housing on the Gulf of Mexico. Bob and Lynn have been active in mutual aid work for more than 40 years. They'll explain the importance of mutual aid organizing for congregations. Bob?
Thank you, Sally, and thank you, Terry. I'm Bob Murphy, and I'll provide a quick description. I'm a white man in his late 70s. My hair is sort of gray-white. I'm wearing a red shirt and a black and white striped apron. And I'm with my wife, Lynn. Lynn is wearing sort of a cream-colored shirt, and she's wearing a blue apron from the Blueberry Festival in our area. And we're in Central Florida, Gulf of Mexico. It's now called St. Petersburg, but this is the traditional home of the Tocobaga people. Seminole people lived here for a number of years, and other tribes have also been in Central Florida. So we want to acknowledge this history, this influence, as we talk about food justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm going to do two things today. First of all, I'm going to try to define mutual aid. And there are many definitions, but I'm going to use a definition that we've used before with the Unitarian Universalists for a just economic community. And then I'm going to provide some examples of mutual aid work that are especially appropriate for congregations. Much of today's discussion is focused on congregation-based organizing, and diversity, equity, and inclusion is a very important part of that. Um, for examples of mutual aid work, we'll talk about potluck meals, community meals, um, food distribution in different ways. Lynn will talk mostly about community gardening as a mutual aid activity. But let me start with the definition that we use. Um, this is, you can think of this as a quote if you like. Mutual aid arrangements are cooperative arrangements for the production and distribution of goods and services. Mutual aid arrangements, by definition, are voluntary, equalitarian, and participatory. And the goal is to empower people so that people can help themselves, their neighbors, and the environment that they share with others. And some of the key terms in the definition include voluntary. So these are voluntary arrangements. Mutual aid is not something that happens by act of Congress or because the White House is in a good mood this week. This is not something that comes from the top down. These are voluntary arrangements, and they're especially important for many religious people here in the United States. Mutual aid arrangements are equalitarian. Um, the goal is to bring everybody in and to work as equals. They're democratic and they're participatory, and this is very important also. With some charities, goods are simply passed out like that, and the recipients really aren't expected to do much of anything. But with mutual aid arrangements, people work together for the common good. They're frequently, not always, but frequently multi-generational, multiracial, multicultural, and mutual aid groups can work together. And when that happens, we talk about a community of communities. So this helps to explain mutual aid. Unitarians and Universalists have been involved with mutual aid for a long, long, long time. Really since the very beginning of the Universalist and Unitarian movements. And there's been much inspiration over the years in a variety of places. Um, the Buddha talks about mutual aid. Mohammed certainly does. Jesus of Nazareth had a lot to say about mutual aid, and there's a lot of emphasis on living together, really in communal arrangements in the very early days of Christianity. I could give other examples, but I particularly note Native Americans and other indigenous people. In Florida, mutual aid started among Native peoples long, long before Christopher Columbus and other Europeans arrived. And mutual aid continues with people like the Seminole and the Miccosukee tribes, in part just as resistance to imperialism. This is how people help each other during difficult times. And some people would say, well, it's not really a philosophy or religion, it's a way of life. This is how we live. But you can make your own decisions about how you want to define mutual aid. I could give many examples of mutual aid in practice. We could talk about housing justice and tenant unions. We could talk about voter registration. We could talk about, which is often a mutual aid activity here in Florida. Things have become very difficult. We could talk about COVID-19, AIDS, HIV, the ways in which neighbors help each other with nursing, transportation, housing, and other support activities. And the list goes on and on. We could talk about immigrant groups and mutual aid. We could talk about African American churches and their historic involvement. But I've just chosen one example, which many Unitarian Universalists already know about, and it involves the Bread and Roses story. So this is why we identify this program as a Bread and Roses program. And I'm going to summarize very quickly this very famous song called Bread and Roses. And you will actually find that in our gray back Unitarian Universalist hymn book. And it's a song that we sing, oh, maybe once or twice a year, very popular in many places. The song was written in the early 1900s, before the First World War, and it very quickly became identified with the women's rights movement. Then in 1912, very early in the year 1912, there was a very famous textile uh, strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts. So this is up in the Merrimack River Valley, and the story has been told in many places. It's part of the Ragtime novel, if you're familiar with that novel. And the story's been told in other places. What's remarkable, well, a lot of things that are remarkable about this strike. First of all, much of the leadership came from women because many of the textile workers were female. And they started the strike and they carried the strike. There was a lot of mutual aid activity involved as they supported their families. There were all kinds of ethnic groups involved. One account says over 100 different ethnic groups were involved in the strike. So we had many Italians, people from Poland, Jewish people, Irish people, Greeks, others, Lebanese. Um, it's a long list of ethnic groups. Some of these people, to be frank, didn't really know how to communicate with each other in the early days of labor organizing. They just literally didn't speak the same language. There wasn't a lot of trust, but somehow it developed. Somehow these different groups of women came together, organized a strike. Many men became involved because men, of course, are also involved in the textile industry. The strike proceeded for several months. Mutual aid became very important as other unions and other labor-minded groups came together to provide assistance. Not unusual when there's a major strike. And they won. It was a success. And the victory was declared in March of 1912. And according to legend, it may just be a legend, but according to legend, the strikers often sang that Bread and Roses song that you will find in your hymn book, the Grayback hymn book. Now,
About that same period in New Jersey, I went to the Bottle House Museum in Woodland Park, and they talked about a big strike in Patterson in 1913 that was
yes,
not as successful, but did go on long. And they talked about using the people's mic, the way we did Occupy. The person would speak on the balcony and it would be relayed. And she also said many languages,
oh
many
yeah,
languages. Yes.
it a lot of the traditions that we take for granted now with Occupy organizing, mutual aid, solidarity economy, ethic of care, community of community thinking. Some of these traditions go way, way back to these strikes in the early 1900s and late 1800s in New Jersey, Massachusetts, out west. So there's a long, long tradition here of economic justice organizing. The Bread and Roses message song really emphasizes 2 points, which are really very important in this kind of organizing. Um, Bread represents, well, material things. People want food, they want adequate clothing. They want a safe place in which they can live, equal pay for equal work. So these are things that, can perhaps easily be measured. Um, Adequate health care. When we get to roses, we're into something else that's also important for working people. People want to be respected as individuals, not as animals, but as people. They want to be empowered. They want to have some say in the conditions in which they live. Um, and they want to enjoy life. So we talk about bread, material things, but we also talk about roses and why both of these things are important, just to affirm not just human rights, but human dignity. Now, with all of this background in mind, I have two things or several things to show you. I'm going to ask for Lynn's help with this basket. Um, as a food basket, we had a recent celebration of bread and roses in Tampa at the Tampa congregation. We celebrate every year in different Unitarian Universalist congregations in Florida and some other states. Roses, of course, are very important, and we try to have different colors to represent different races, different cultures, and these are a few. The yellow rose, we're on the Gulf of Mexico, so yellow roses, maybe it's the yellow rose of Texas. Again, you can use your imagination. We have different colors. And we have different food. I'm reaching over to a heavy cast iron skillet because we're celebrating diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're celebrating unity, the ability to come together, to just enjoy each other's good company, to share meals. This is a cornbread recipe that we have developed. We call it Caribbean cornbread. It's done in a cast iron skillet, which is traditional in the South. It is vegan, it's vegetarian. So we have some hot peppers that are included that we grow in local gardens. And instead of using egg, we use bananas or plantains. Um, we use coconut milk. So there's no dairy products involved, no meat products, no eggs. And many people seem to like this. It's an easy introduction to vegan and vegetarian baking. And we call this Caribbean cornbread. So, and if you want the recipe, we can find a way to send it to you. Uh, Now we have the original corn cakes for the Americas. And these are tortillas. And we use these for Cinco de Mayo, Indigenous Peoples Day in October, and different holidays. And we remember that there are many crops that started here in the Americas, and chief among them perhaps is what we would call corn or maize, which started in Central America, oh, maybe back around 500 AD, maybe even earlier than that. Uh, Tortillas, of course, are common in much of Latin America, certainly in Mexico, and they're also very popular here in Florida and other parts of the United States. So we have that. And then we talk a lot about how important food is in different religious traditions. So here's a box of matzos we had. And there are many stories about unleavened bread, and they're associated with Passover and the escape from Egypt. And I think many of you are already familiar with matzos, and they're highly recommended when you talk about food and religion. And then finally, there are other kinds of bread that we often have with us, but these are pita breads. There are many ways of preparing pita bread in different parts of North Africa and the Middle East. This is the kind of pita bread that you would find in Palestine, Israel, Lebanon, that part of the world. And what's interesting is this is from a bakery in Lawrence, Massachusetts, the home of bread and roses. And it's a reminder that there are many people in that part of the world, that part of Massachusetts, who identify with Greek culture, Lebanese, Syrian, Jewish culture. And this is the kind of pita bread that they would enjoy. So I make several points. When we talk about food justice, we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We talk about empowerment. We don't just want to find a free meal somewhere when we're hungry. We want to be included in the food justice movement. Lynn and I do a lot of volunteer work as mutual aid organizers, and we work with several congregations in Florida, several communities. We're involved in a variety of food-related projects. And when people come to me and they say, "Well, how do we get involved in mutual aid? What do we do? Is it complicated? Is it going to be difficult, controversial?" The response we offer is start with food projects, because even if you're a very small fellowship with maybe 20 members or even less, think about potluck dinners, think about vegetable gardening, and you may want to get involved in some charitable work, maybe Meals on Wheels or other things, but start with food, and you'll very quickly come to an understanding of what's involved in mutual aid. And in the process, you'll get some good meals. You'll be with others. You'll learn some new skills, and you'll meet new friends. And for us, that's very important. So I pass it over to Lynn, who's our expert gardener.
Well, I have a little bit more experience than Bob does. I've probably been involved in community gardens since the 1980s, and often as a participant, but also at one point I was involved with the starting of a community garden. We moved to Florida. In any event, there are two types of basic community gardens. There's one that's called the collective garden, and that's where a group of people come together and garden together. It takes a lot of sharing. It takes a lot of defining who's going to take care of what. They make all decisions, joint make decisions about what to grow and when to grow it. We're actually involved in a small one here in Florida, in the senior center downtown, where it's a sort of a collective garden arrangement. I'm more often, it's more, and what I'm most familiar with is an allotment garden, and that's where every gardener is given a plot, and usually it's a membership, and then you are responsible for maintaining that plot. And what you share is you share often water and mostly often tools. And one garden, I mean, some places these community gardens are very popular. And when we moved to Florida, the one garden we were getting involved, the one I got involved with was in a nearby town, and they had such a waiting list that I went ahead and volunteered for the compost committee. And with that, I ended up getting a garden within 2 or 3 months, where I would have been a couple years of getting one. So, and I do suggest that if you ever do start a community garden, that you sort of think about there have to be certain kinds of rules. You want to make sure that when people make an appointment, it's when they're going to start the garden, how they maintain it, and what happens if the garden isn't maintained. So I thought we'd talk about some of the things that we're growing right now. We have the advantage of being in Florida, so that we can garden all year long. And from our current gardens, I have some red Russian kale and some collards. And I like with my collards to have mustard greens. I don't like them alone. What we have really enjoyed is actually growing our own celery, because you can use it in cooking. And for peppers, we have some poblano, and I also have some jalapeno, and I have obviously some small tomatoes. These are things that we're currently, plus I have a very large herb garden. Right now, our gardens are going to these are all going to get blanched out, so that I'm going to have to start thinking about what we're going to grow in the summer. And in Florida, there are a couple things you can grow in the summer. One is okra. The other is sweet potatoes. And this is my to-be sweet potato plant. You'll see that up here are my slips. So if you ever do sweet potatoes, you have to have the slips to start the sweet potato. That's what you use. And we grow them here, and use it as actually as it can be a great ground cover. And they have lovely flowers. And they'll grow all summer long. And then in the fall, we'll get one out of one small area. I got 50 potatoes, different sizes, but they just proliferate if you give them enough. If the soil is not too dense and you've got enough area and you've got enough time, we usually start our sweet potatoes in May, June, and then we will harvest them in October and sometimes into December. So we're have a great advantage of being here for being able to harvest from us the entire
Yeah.
year. So
We're always planting and harvesting something. It was very different up north where it seemed a third of the year to half the year, nothing was growing, at least not any vegetables outside of a greenhouse. But down here, and we put a lot of emphasis on this point, give it a lot of attention. We're always planting, we're always growing, we're always harvesting. No matter how difficult conditions may be, we stay with it. And we enjoy the produce, whether it's in August or December or March or whenever it is.
I think also community gardens is a great way for people to share things. You not only just share knowledge, because some people are seasoned gardeners, some are not. It's a good place for people to start to know about how to garden and how to grow their own food. You also can decide. I often like to pick things that I can't get in the grocery store, like the red Russian kale. It isn't available. So you can choose what you want. But the big thing is that it's a sharing of knowledge and of effort, because sometimes people need help with planting their garden. And once you planted the garden, it's basically, if you've got a great watering source, um, that 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 makes it. I mean, it's not difficult to maintain. It's not something you have to tend to all every week, every day. Usually about once a week. You don't have to do it. And but again, you can get to know people, and it's a good mutual aid activity.
It's community organizing 101. Um, I've met different people say, well, you can't just save the world with these little garden patches and these wellness checks and these things. And I said, well, yeah, you're definitely right. We need big agencies like World Health Organizations, and we need the Paris Accords and consumer protection agencies. We need all these things. But in order to make good government happen, you need a base of community organizing. You need people who can hold government accountable while they push for change. You can call that participatory democracy, or there may be some other term, but it's basically community organizing, and it frequently involves food. You got to keep the troops fed. You got to keep the people on the picket line fed, and look after families and retirees. And without this kind of participatory democracy, don't expect much out of the White House or out of Congress. Keep the pressure on, and keep the pressure on to get accountability. That's one of the things you learn in mutual aid. People begin to trust each other, they learn how to work with each other, and they hold each other accountable. And all of these things are very important.
Okay,
I
I have.
remember one of the books I read about organizing in the 21st century, and they said, it's really easy to get 70,000 people's name on a petition these days, but you don't know anybody. And
Yeah,
building the trust the way the door-to-door canvassing did back in our day, as we're a bunch of gray hairs here, that's a different level of organizing, and it builds relationships in a better way, a different way.
yeah.
Maybe the resistances right now are doing that.
It's
I
sort
think
of
so.
happening here in Florida. Um,
We're all getting to know each other really well.
oh yes, we're making some new friends very fast.
Yeah. Well, I have a very big garden. It's about 50 by 50. And so your little spiel, Lynn, brought up a lot of questions. Do you start your own seeds or do you buy like different plants?
We often start our own seeds,
Hmm.
and especially our tomatoes, and peppers I found difficult, although I've done it.
Hmm.
Um, and the problem, what's good is if once you get a party seed and you get the good plant, you know where it came from, and you know it's totally definitely organic. And one of the problems I find in Florida is that very often, if you go to the big Lowe's and whatever, you'll find that they don't have what grows in your season. They
Hmm.
have what grows up in the north.
Hmm.
And so it's really interesting. Here we don't grow very much in the summer, but I mean, and so it's you can find every seed you want for the rest of the year, but they don't have them necessarily in December. Can I find things? Some things we do start plants only out of convenience because it does take time to grow
Hmm.
things. And actually, where we live now, we live in a community, and I actually run a little nursery
Nice.
for other people, and so we pass around the seeds. We have a whole residence earth box garden series, and so we all have boxes, and so
Mhm.
we help each other start those. And so I often do seeds for that. So I often do
Yeah.
seeds.
Our
Uh,
our
Take more.
library has seeds for people.
Yep.
yeah.
And so when I collect them, I take some there. I'll collect flower seeds like zinnias and marigolds, which are super easy. I collected arugula, but I think I gave them all to the library because I couldn't find any, but it
Oh
sprouts
dear.
up anyway.
Yeah.
Um,
I went
there's
to a seed exchange down in Collingswood or somewhere down in South
Oh,
Jersey. They had a whole lot of organic seeds, and
oh,
one of my Occupy Sandy colleagues, Nate Kleiman, has started the experimental farm project, and I was raising all kinds of heritage seeds and so forth,
wow.
and
Yeah.
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 yeah,
And those are
well,
fun because those heritage seeds, some of them really are wonderful plants. Make a wonderful seed. I mean, the tomato plants are, I mean, tomatoes are wonderful.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of different, beets are also another area.
I'd be happy to share my gardening. In fact, I don't worry about it. But one question I have is how do you get people who know your seeds that are starting well enough that you can turn them loose with a hoe without having them take everything out?
Well, I can tell you, I had a hard time. I could not believe I found leeks. I found little leek plants, and I was so
Oh,
excited. This is in our garden downtown.
right.
So excited, and I put them out, and somebody thought they were all weeds.
Hmm.
So
no,
I put out 100 this last, this last time. I think I got 4 leeks. So
Well, that's about enough
that's
for
an
me,
issue.
but I've been planting leeks, but I get way more. I can only use a handful. One thing I always like to remember is that every season's different. And just because one season, particularly here in Iowa, if you can grow something one year doesn't mean the next year it's going to work.
Yeah. And
And we have certain pests like the squash bugs that are really hard on zucchini and summer squash. And what I ended up doing is just leaving them out of my garden. I plant them at home, which
Mm.
is 20 miles away. So we still have the bugs, but they don't seem to get it at home. And I learned one thing a couple of years ago. I like parsnips and I would plant them. And what I was told was you mix it up with radishes, mix the seeds, and you plant them because they're slow growing and you can't find the row, and you need something to identify
Huh.
the row so you
Lovely.
don't
It's
take
a great
out
idea.
the.
Great way. That would be. Yeah.
Okay, but what I discovered was if you soak the seeds overnight,
Yeah.
they come up really fast.
After. Yeah. A
uh,
lot of seeds are like that. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now I've got about 50 pounds of parsnips in the garden. They overwinter.
Yeah.
And I fixed a bunch of them for Easter, but I'm gonna have a bunch for the food pantry.
no,
And my husband's like, do you think any of the people that are getting their food there will want to eat parsnips? But we're in a fairly
they'll discover
international
something
community.
new.
Well, they will or they won't eat them at all. But the we're in an international community, so if they eat them anywhere in the world, there will be somebody who will
Right.
oh
appreciate
yeah. Yeah.
their
Mhm.
being there. Um,
That's
yeah, you
how
answered.
one of the things I found. One of the things I found is that people, for example, don't like okra,
Uh-huh.
and
Mhm.
so I've passed out recipes for roasting okra. Because you roast an okra, it's totally different than if you use it in a gumbo, where it's
That's
slimy in a
interesting.
gumbo, but if it's roasted, it's really not. And
Huh.
so sometimes it's just sort of telling people about other ways of preparing it and
Mhm.
passing out recipes.
Well, we would take our okra and fry it up and have it as an
Yep,
appetizer.
yep,
And it's
exactly.
really very good. And it's not
Roast,
slimy when you do that.
That's
But
interesting.
Yeah.
one of the questions I have, I ran restaurants for 35 years, and one of my interview questions was, what don't you like to eat? And it told me a lot about the character of the person. If they start to give me a list of 50 things, it's like, I don't think you belong in the
You're
restaurant
picky.
business. You're too scared of it all. Um, but okra was a common, I don't like okra, it's slimy. The other one was peas, but I suspect that's because the peas were canned. And
Yeah.
canned
Yeah.
peas are really, pardon me, I think they're kind of disgusting in a way that fresh or frozen are not.
My
Uh,
favorite way to eat a pea is raw.
Yeah, when
Yeah.
you get them that way. If you can, yeah, if you can shuck them and that's
Yep.
true.
well, Sally, do you want to talk about Occupy and what you
Yeah.
did with Sandy?
Um, yeah. Uh, what I did with Sandy was when the storm hit, all the Occupy folks in New York were getting calls from all over, including in New Jersey, and they finally turned to a couple of folks from from Philadelphia. We're stuck in the middle. It's either New York or Philly, right? And said, "Hey guys, do you want to start something?" And Nate had spent summers at the Jersey Shore with his grandmom. And he and Larry called up a bunch of New Jerseyans, and we started with a call every night and started with, okay, who's got the biggest problem right now? And after we did that, we sorted through the state, and that's when I got my cell phone because there was no way I could talk to the people in Rockaway because they had no internet, they had no nothing. I needed a cell phone. We joined up with the long-term recovery committees, and it was interesting. Occupy Sandy New York actually went out to Staten Island and knocked on doors of a lot of police live on Staten Island. Police were kind of surprised to see Occupy people there to help them, but it's mutual aid. It's a disaster. Your neighbors are your neighbors. You deal with the politics later, but first yeah. Um, and as I said, one of the people who got Occupy Sandy, New Jersey started was Nate Kleinman, who started the Experimental Farm Network. And when COVID came along, he had all these crops, and he said, these crops are not going to get out to people who need to eat, and I can't be the only one. So he put up an Instagram post, and he
Hmm.
started what became co-op gardens, which
Hmm.
connected seed holders, people with land, people with food, people who eat together to share stuff, and it's still going as all kind of mutual aid, voluntary, cooperative sharing. So yeah, good stuff can come out of bad things.
Okay. A question for the two of you, Bob and Lynn, is who does most of the cooking and who does the gardening?
Well, honestly, I do most of the cooking.
Yeah.
I happen to like cooking, and and I like interesting things. I thought I turned that off.
Oh,
Just go get it, would you? Um, and we both do gardening. We just have different roles in the garden because I have a little bit more experience. Um, since I have more experience with gardening, um, I sort of am one who helps sort of say, that may work, that may not work. And Bob does most of the weeding
Oh, wow.
and the
Wow.
maintenance.
My
An
husband
important
will
job.
help with the weeding, but he doesn't like it and he won't do fine weeding. He'll take the cultivator through the rows
Uh,
and but he doesn't like getting down on his hands and knees.
oh,
Actually, I bought a bench this last year and I can sit and reach the ground to do the weeding because
mhm.
bending over or being on my knees, I mean, I'm 77, I'll be 78 in a couple of weeks. It just doesn't work like it used to.
Yeah, yeah, that happens.
So,
Bob, I think I met you during the CSAI on ethical eating, or
oh,
yeah,
yes. I think it was back in '08 or whenever,
Something, 10, something like that. Yeah.
several years ago, General
Yeah.
Assembly statement. Yeah, I was the guy who started that, and of course, it was introduced in Florida. We were very concerned about food justice and the fact that
Mhm.
some people have a lot of food to eat, and some, well, they're very hungry. They're living on the street. Some of them are taking food out of dumpsters. So it was very much an economic justice, social justice statement. A lot of attention given to farm workers, other concerns in Florida. And Lynn and I have very much stayed with that ever since. We do some support for vegetarians and vegans. We try to introduce recipes to different groups that say, I don't like vegetarian cooking. We say, oh, try this, try that, you know.
Mhm.
Um, so the food justice movement continues and it continues in Florida, and we're still involved with the Immokalee workers.
Yeah.
Oh,
Workers.
And there are
Yeah.
other farm worker
Yeah.
groups too in the state.
mhm.
But Immokalee people do a lot of mutual aid work as part of union organ. Actually, they wouldn't call it a union. It's a little bit different from traditional unions.
Mhm.
That's a complicated story, but in some ways, what's happening in Immokalee is more like mutual aid with a collective bargaining agreement. That's very interesting
Right, yeah.
story.
I know they've done well with the fair food movement,
Oh
and
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
the fair food program.
I remember the penny a pound for
yep,
Yep.
yeah.
fast food places for tomatoes. In fact,
And
the GA, was it 2016, 2018 in Columbus, Ohio? We went to the Wendy's
Yeah, in
headquarters for,
2017, we did a
yeah.
program in New Orleans, and I was the chair of that workshop, the coordinator. So the UUA has done a lot with farm workers, and the Florida story is part of that. We also work with farm workers in North Carolina, and before that, I'd done some work in California. So it's a tradition.
they're very important. I mean, this is amazing
Yeah.
what's happening now in our area with immigration. And certainly
Oh.
farmers are
Yeah.
being very much hit. And I'm hoping enough of the people who own these farms are starting to get hit because people are not showing up, and they shouldn't,
Yeah,
because
they're
it's very
afraid.
dangerous times.
Very dangerous.
And it was interesting. We just recently went to a conference with the one of the organizers for the Moakley farm workers, and she said we're going on, we're keeping on, but we're not doing any demonstrations right
Yeah.
now, just
Mhm.
because of the concern of not
Yeah.
exposing anybody.
Yeah,
So
people from ICE might
yeah, but
grab
the
you.
most
Yeah.
most important thing they do, they run a hotline
Yeah.
for people who
Oh, that's good.
are farmers, I mean farmers, farm workers who, if they run across an issue, they have someplace to call
That's
to get
good. Yeah.
help as to what can and cannot, should and should not be done. So
Yeah.
it's one of the big things they do.
Yeah,
One
there's a
of our
church in
commu-
Highland Park, New Jersey, who has kind of a hotline for immigration issues here in the state. And a friend of my mom's was just saying that she was texting back and forth with a neighbor that she doesn't know really well from another country. And in February, kind of radio silence. And she has to son. She said, "Oh, mom's okay. No more, no else." And it's got to be fear. Just-
Yeah. Be quiet.
in Storm Lake, Iowa, they have immigrants who staff their pork processing plant,
Mhm.
and they're reporting that the streets are empty.
Yeah.
They're still there, but they're not traveling anywhere. And my daughter noticed that in Miami, uh, that the traffic has reduced considerably since ICE has been hanging out. That people are afraid to go out. What a horrible, horrible. Did you see that they arrested a judge in Milwaukee for
Yeah,
being
we
too
read about
nice?
this morning. Yeah.
Oh, I
This is
missed that one, but I
crazy.
they're threatening with charging Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez with terrorism because she had the audacity to publicize a workshop for Know Your Rights.
Hmm.
It's making it too hard to arrest people.
Um,
Come on.
well,
Yeah.
we do some civil rights and human rights education as
Yeah.
part of what we do. So who knows? when you get to be our age,
Yes.
That's what we say about Chuck Grassley. When he gets to be his age, why is he afraid of Trump? You know,
Yeah,
but
I mean,
well,
I think
he's
sometimes it is easier for older people, 70s, 80s, whatever old is these days,
Mhm.
to do social
Justice.
justice work.
Yeah. Yeah.
One woman on Cape Cod said, "Yeah, I've spent a couple of nights in jail." She was involved in anti-nuclear protests, and she said,
Mhm.
"Not a whole lot different from being in a nursing home, really." Uh,
but cheaper.
My
cheaper,
grandmother
uh,
my
security
grandmother
maybe
used yeah,
better, so
yeah.
nobody's
My
going to break
grandmother
it.
used to say, as you get older, you get bolder.
Yeah, that's what it should
Yes,
be. That would be great.
I think
Yeah.
that's the way
Yeah.
it should be, and it
Yeah.
is.
Exactly.
We've had recent demonstrations. We had a big demonstration for Women's Day and
Mhm.
some other demonstrations, and it's interesting. Many of the organizers are, I'm going to say, women past the age of 60. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
And some of them are a lot older than that because they learned these things
Mhm.
30, 40, 50 years ago, how to put a demonstration together and even how to go to jail in some cases, how to find a bail bondsman if you need one. Uh, how to deal with confrontational situations. So
Well, for a few
other
years,
generations have learned how to do it,
yeah.
So,
For a few years, I was a legal observer with the National Lawyers Guild,
yeah.
and I remember being at a not with that group, but being at a Keystone XL protest in summer 2011, and Bill McKibben saying, "College kids, think twice about getting arrested. You don't know what your career is going to be. You don't know what you want
Yeah.
on your record. Teachers, this is what tenure is for."
Yeah. And then he could have said, retirees,
Yes.
you've got
Yep.
nothing to lose. Really,
Right.
you
And then
know.
there was the
Uh,
rocking chair rebellion. And
yeah.
there are radical elders out there who are doing some awesome organizing.
I'm not going to embarrass my parents because they're long gone. I'm
Right?
not building up a resume looking for a new job. That ain't going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
you might be surprised. We might need to work again, but who knows the
Well,
way things are
uh,
going.
oh,
Bob,
well,
I have a question about the food
uh,
calendar for congregations with
hmm.
holidays and do you want to talk a little about that?
oh, well, every religion you can think of takes food very seriously, and different holidays usually involve food. So we could talk about Ramadan for Islamic people, where there's a fast during the day and then there's a big meal at night. We could talk about the Passover tradition, Jewish harvest traditions, and the list goes on. Green corn for the Cherokee people. Uh, and for Unitarian Universalists, the different congregations have different food related traditions. The bread and roses ceremonies, early March for Women's History Day, and we talk about that song and diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are other Indigenous Peoples Day is very important because we talk about native crops. In the Americas, we talk about corn, but we also talk about peppers, pineapple. That surprises many people that this is actually a native crop for the West Indies. Um,
Hmm.
and these are all food celebrations. We actually have a gumbo dinner in August. We have a lot of gumbo, so we celebrate that with New Orleans jazz. And December, there's a lot of holidays. They all involve food. Every holiday involves food.
Well,
So in
here in
some ways,
Jersey, the Three
following all that.
Sisters.
Yeah. What's that? Oh, the Three Sisters. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Corn, beans, and squash. Yeah.
Yep.
Even in Florida. Yeah. So,
Certainly in the fall, that's a great,
yeah.
great thing. And I think also, the potlucks, I mean, most churches or congregations are involved with potlucks.
Mhm.
And that's a great way of sharing food. Um, and I,
Yeah.
So we did something at our congregation. We had a member who had a number of apple trees, which now I have them. They're just getting there. But I do organic, so I don't get the huge crop that I
yeah,
could
yeah,
get.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I get the crop, but some of them have worms, but that's beside the point. At any rate, we did
A lot of protein.
an apple communion.
Oh,
which
Yep.
was really interesting. And we had enough apples to pass out to everybody.
yeah.
And
Oh, that's
the
fun.
orchard owner would say, well, you look at the bottom, and that's what's left over of the flour and
Mm-hmm.
the seeds.
Huh.
She just did a
Yeah.
nice job with it. It was kind
But
of interesting,
that's
Yeah.
and it's a
interesting.
nice fall tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Well, have we forgotten anything?
Do we have any more time? There's always something else
Oh,
to
well,
say.
we've got 5 more minutes if we want
Oh,
to stick to an hour.
I'll mention maybe three or four things really fast. The weather here is very hot, so we
Mm-hmm.
do a lot of work with street medics, wellness checks. Hydration is very important, and we're teaching people how to live in a changing climate. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Part of what is changing is growing conditions. So we're in contact with people in Latin America and the Caribbean. We're learning a lot from immigrants from the Caribbean, crops that they grow in Haiti and Jamaica and other places. Len and I went to Guatemala a couple of years ago. This is fair trade coffee from Guatemala. And we encourage congregations use fair trade products and get to know what's happening in international agriculture. And one last thing I'll mention quickly. We've experimented a little bit with solar cooking.
Ah.
Haven't had much success, but in the summer especially, we encourage, just give it a try. We've made some simple desserts and some other things, so we'll stay with that. There's a lot more
There's
that
an apple crisp. It's very easy to make
apple crisp.
Oh.
with solar cooking.
Yeah.
I've not found, actually getting the water hot enough to really boil things is almost impossible,
Yeah.
but
Mm-hmm.
certainly that kind of solar cooking is simple.
Yeah.
It's easy.
So we
It's
stay
prepared.
with that. And there's a lot more that could be said about food, much of it mutual aid related because it involves education, trying to deal with a very difficult political situation. Food assistance programs are being cut back. Our state government doesn't want to talk about climate change, doesn't want to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, doesn't want to talk about voter registration. Um, so we try to be helpful. A lot of it's education. And if the religious groups aren't going to do it, I don't know who will.
Just sticking a little bit with climate change, that there is a real effort here in Florida for people to learn how to cook and use plants that we haven't had in the past. Callaloo is
Mm-hmm.
one, for example. It's very easy to grow. It's a green and very popular in the islands, on the islands.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Another one is called Egyptian spinach. It's yeah, it's a little bit difficult to work with, but it grows so well here, and it can be used in salads and such. Um, doesn't quite it's not quite the same, but it's close. There's different kinds of yams and such that are also being uh, people are trying them here in Florida because again, it's becoming so much hot. Right now, I'm getting a lot of my plants being blanched out, and that's unusual. Usually
Mm-hmm.
didn't happen until another month. So it's about a month off. We're losing many of our herbs, for example. You just can't keep them in the summer here.
It's not even May yet.
Exactly.
They come back in
It's not
August.
just lack of water. It's really essentially, it's just too
Everything's
hot.
changing. Yeah.
Just too hot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing crocuses coming up earlier. We're seeing, some plants that just don't do as well as they used to. They don't have the hard winters that they need. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little about fair trade since you brought it up. And
Hmm.
we used to have one of our faithful members, Irv, who headed up the committee that kept us stocked and sold fair trade.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But what I looked at that and I thought, we don't have a lot of capacity in a lot of our congregations, and what might be helpful is a buyer's guide
Yeah.
for
So,
getting fair trade. I think the coffee was that from Aldi's? It
It
looked
is,
like
yeah.
something,
yeah.
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 They
Oh,
Yeah.
have they
oh,
have fair traded items, and
yeah.
I go
One,
there at least once a week, and it's easy for me to pick it
yeah.
up.
And Equal Exchange has
Yeah.
has a congregational program for,
Yeah, but
Some of the
that,
Paul Newman products are still fair trade. Some are not, but some are.
yeah, really.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And there are other examples.
you just have to make it easy for
Read the
people.
labels.
We're too busy otherwise.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this has been a fun afternoon. Uh,
Come on
I,
down.
yes. I want to thank everyone for this delightful discussion and mention that this is a product of UU's for a just economic community. I try not to use acronyms, but I think UU is okay. I don't think that should stump anybody. One time I complained about acronyms and then I said, something about UUSC, and I thought everybody knew what UUSC was, but I got a big laugh out of that one.
Yeah. Oh, I've with the Bergen Long-Term Recovery Committee from Sandy, anytime an acronym was used, our chairperson would jump on it and say, somebody here doesn't understand the acronyms. Spread them all out. Yeah.
That, yeah, and that's when I wish that we had a shorter name when I'm signing
Yes.
a letter for us, and it's a half a line long. Okay,
Yes.
well, I'm going to put on my screen share so people know how to find us. Okay, there we are. And we'll let that run for a minute or two. And then we're going to say goodbye. And hopefully I can figure out how to get rid of the flaws, particularly the beginning where it was a lot of chit chat. Okay.
Thanks all. This has really been a interesting
Thank you.
conversation.
It has been a good conversation. Very good.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thanks for including us.
Yes.